board when they come before the agency for which you have obviously very serious sense of responsibility. Thank you.
Okay, and if the board wishes, if you want to require that of us, we'd be happy to give that to you. I have a retired IRS agent on the grand jury that would be happy to put together something for you if you guys want that. Any other questions?
Did you have a question, Supervisor Dillon?
No, Mr. Chairman, I'll make the recommended motion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Comment.
There is a motion discussion?
Yes, well,
Supervisor
first
Schmidt.
of all, Mr. Scholes, we're not guys, okay? That's not how you address the Board of Supervisors. We're not guys, okay? We're not guys. My concern is more around the allocation of additional resources from economic development. Now, Mr. Mitchell, I think we ought to look deeper into this in terms of where the appropriate funding would come from to cover an overage. And I think, to Supervisor Colfax's point, I don't think in this case to just go ahead and grant this out of economic development resources, we're holding this body to the same standard and accountability as we would department heads. I mean, I think we need a plan going forward. I think before we do that, we ought to look at the budget for next year. The board ought to be informed on that. And we haven't heard anything in terms of how reductions are going to be made. I mean, there are things called telecommunications. There are other ways that you get this county on board from afar. So, I mean, I think we need an economic plan. We need fiscal management. So my concerns are different than Supervisor Colfax's. They're more along the lines of the accountability factor with respect to budgeting and planning. Clearly that didn't happen. Clearly this department was allowed to just spend, and then we see that $20,000 additional was being requested out of economic development. I have real concerns about that. I don't, as the grand jury has, spent hours and hours sharpening their pencil with respect to board expenditures, it just seems sort of ironic that we get this $20,000 request, retroactively, I guess, assuming the monies have already been spent, to go back and pay for that. I don't think that's wise use of county funds. I think this is a very critical issue, and we need to look at it more in depth. So I would like to request that you look into this further. I think there might be more appropriate budget units that should address this issue of the expenditures. Where's the grand jury linked? Who has oversight? I think these are the things we need to look at, just to conveniently take it out of promotions, which I think the public needs to know, and it isn't clear or transparent from this agenda summary, that this transfer of funds from promotion budget unit 1810 is from our economic development. I mean, this is something that the board has made as our #1 priority this year within your office, I believe. We're having 2 workshops on it this year. And to say that there are additional funds there because we haven't been able to recruit an economic development coordinator, to my mind, that's not good fiscal practice or good public policy to funnel this money to the grand jury to do the investigations that they're conducting. I think, yes, we need transparency, but I can't support it going out of our economic development wing. I just don't think that's appropriate. I think we need to look further at the actual expenditures, bring us not just a round number, but a hard and fast number. At the same time, you bring us the plan for the 6% reduction that we're requiring of all the other departments. Now, that's my understanding in the budget discussion we had, the instructions you brought to the board that you've given to departments. If this is a department and a function of the county, it needs to be held to the same standard. So I think we need to get on with that process, and then we need to look at how we appropriately fund the overages that have already occurred.
Supervisor Colfax? Additional comment or? Okay.
Well, comment to the motion.
Okay.
This board has informally promised the Arts Council funding, I think, in the amount of about $30,000. Supervisor Pinches, weren't you on board? That suggestion, is the number about right? $30,000. It's going to be a stretch to come up with that $30,000. It's going to be something that we have never done before, and it's long overdue. Are we going to support now the grand jury that's been very, very concerned with certain trivial issues? and in fact, then have no funding available when the Arts Council comes before us in August or before and says, we need this funding. I would suggest here, pick up on Supervisor Smith's suggestion, I would suggest that since oversight of the grand jury, essentially the manager of the grand jury, I might be stretching it a bit there. I don't know all the workings of the grand jury yet, but I'm learning. I would suggest here that since oversight of the grand jury resides with another elected official, whose travel plans I don't think or travel expenditures have been examined very closely by the grand jury, but that official is our district attorney. And if I am correct about this, that these funds should be taken, if from any source, once the documentation is provided to this body, should be taken from or located within the district attorney's office. This is one of the responsibilities of that office. It is also a responsibility to ensure that the subordinate agencies comply with the regulations. Now, maybe that's a stretch, but my point being here is I don't think the Arts Council or some other program should be called up just willy-nilly without any documentation whatsoever by an agency that presumably prides itself on its attention to details, even if they're not accurate or properly presented. I think that agency has an obligation to do unto others, I think you might understand that concept, do unto others as one would have it done unto thou. Do I have that right? The point here is that I don't like to see this being done just because it is the grand jury and smack a couple of supervisors around here, and isn't that fun? Or that there be a revenge attitude here. Forgive thy enemies. There's another thing you probably are aware of, Reverend. But the fact is that there are standards, and we are up against a very tight budget. And frankly, the irony of this, if I liked the flavor of it, I would say it's delicious. I think the irony of this is actually ludicrous. But I would ask our CEO to take a look at the role of the district attorney, an elected official, in being responsible for this. Locate the funds there if possible. If not, bring us the documentation, come back before us, and we'll treat you like any other responsible or irresponsible entity in the proceedings. But it's inappropriate for us to be voting funding at this juncture when all we have before us is one page, two sides, documenting anything at all about this matter.
Thanks, Supervisor. Supervisor Pinchas.
When I write my book, it's going to be a good one here, but
Get the names right.
first of all, I agree with all the arguments that's been presented here on this issue. You know, this whole issue of travel and how many trips is really necessary to go to all meetings, and that's what this is really about. Is, I mean, maybe I could tell the grand jury, well, some of these meetings that were held wasn't necessary, so you didn't have to do the travel. And, you know, that's kind of tit for tat. But the fact of the matter is, we have a responsibility, and the grand jury is entitled to reimbursement for their travel. How we come up with